Right, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whenever you are watching this. This is your lesson about the Reichstag fire. Today we're going to be looking at a very important building in Germany here. This is called the Reichstag. We've kind of got a during the fire and an after the fire image. We're going to be trying to look at the impact of the Reichstag fire and how the Nazis, as clever as they are going to use a building burning down for their own support. So before we get underway with the Reichstag fire, we need to clarify a few key terms. So within Germany, we had various political parties. We've got the socialists, we have the Nazis, we have the nationalists, we have the communists, we have all these different groups who are bidding for power. We also have a group called the industrialists. And if we have a look at these key words, hopefully we can match those up. Feel free at this point to pause the video, give a quick think of which ones you feel belong where, and we'll sort them out in just a moment. So our Nationalist Party, these are going to be people who are part of the German National People's Party. They believe that Germany is essentially the greatest country on earth. All other countries are not as good as Germany, and essentially they want to see the country restored to its former greatness. Industrialists, these are going to be people who own or run a factory or an industry. And Hitler had a lot of friends who were industrialists. If you've heard of the brand Hugo Boss, Mercedes-Benz, Volkswagen, these were all businesses that were run by people who agreed with Hitler's ideas. So Hitler would often get favors from them. His SS soldiers were outfitted with Hugo Boss uniforms. Hitler liked to ride around in Mercedes-Benz. And oftentimes German people could buy a Volkswagen at a reduced rate. Socialists, these are people who believe in state ownership. They're quite the opposite to communists who believe that the government should run everything. Socialists believe that everybody within the state should be able to contribute towards the means of production. So we're going to talk about the Reichstag fire because it's quite similar to our own parliament. Now, you could probably think back to a time in history where somebody tried to burn down parliament. And every year, remember, the 5th of November, we talk about the story of Guy Fawkes and Bonfire Night. Now, we know what happened to Guy Fawkes. He was arrested, brought to the Tower of London, and gently tortured until he confessed to trying to blow up the Parliament buildings. But even today, if someone tried to set fire to our Parliament buildings, they would probably be made out of an example. So they wouldn't be executed. We don't have the death penalty in the UK. But they would certainly be in a very public trial, and the full force of the law would be exacted on them. There'd be loads of media coverage, propaganda posters, and all of this would be used to help the government gain support. The government would look really good because they're prosecuting someone who tried to burn down Parliament, all the while solving the issue by putting them into prison. Now, we've got to think of which political party were Hitler's greatest rivals at the time. And this would be the communists. They were extremely popular in Germany. The communists ran the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia in 1917 and 1919. And this showed German people that if you really want to change, you need to be violent. And you need to stand up against your government and overthrow them with using arms. And this would inspire the Munich Push, the Kapp Push, and the Spartacist uprisings within Germany. Unfortunately, those didn't work. Those uprisings failed, and people were still left wanting change. Heroes. In January of 1933, only 2 out of 12 members of the cabinet were Nazis. And think of the cabinet as the closest advisors within government. Hitler did not have a majority government. He didn't have half of the Reichstag under his control. And the last one, President Hindenburg, hated Hitler. He referred to Hitler as the little man. He wasn't a big fan of Hitler or the way that he was campaigning for more support, particularly his speeches. Now, if we look at the question at the bottom, does it appear as though Hitler is on his rise to power or his fall from grace? Things aren't looking very good for the little man, as Hindenburg would say. We've got 2 out of 12 Nazis in cabinet. Hitler would probably want that to actually be 12 out of 12. He does not have a majority government, so he doesn't have full control within the Reichstag. And the only guy who can give Hitler any power hates his guts. So it doesn't look as though he is actually rising to power right now. It appears as though Hitler is actually falling from grace. He was a Dutch communist. Now, as a foreigner, Nazis really wouldn't like him. There were very few jobs in Germany in the early 1930s, and foreign people coming into the country were taking these jobs away from Germans. So there was a lot of hatred towards people who were not from Germany. The second thing they're not going to like is the fact that he's a communist. So he stands for everything that a lot of Germans stand against. He thinks that the government should have total control over people's lives rather than society coming together to actually work together and support each other. And the last one, and most interesting one, is the fact that he was actually Marinus.
Marinus van der Lubbe, he was the man who was held accountable for setting the Reichstag fire. Now, according to the Nazis, he was in the area at the time of the fire and admitted to trying to set the fire himself. Now, the Nazis wanted to be able to not only pin the Reichstag fire on Marinus van der Lubbe, a Dutch communist, but also onto the Communist Party in general. The Nazis were hoping to take some of the Communist Party's support away before the election coming up in March, and this was a fantastic opportunity to be able to do so. Now, van der Lubbe's trial went on for quite some time, and he was executed in January of 1934. So the fire was set at the end of February of 1933, and he was kept alive in custody for nearly a year as the trial went on. Now, the trial was by no means fair. Marinus van der Lubbe felt that he wasn't given the opportunity to try to share his side of the story, so much so that he actually went on a hunger strike. But he was being used as propaganda for the Nazis. And this was their opportunity to be able to have a physical person to blame for setting the fire. Now it's time for our bonus facts about the Reichstag fire. This was one of the first times the Nazis actually had the opportunity to take a majority, but the Reichstag fire did not actually allow that majority government to happen. In the election that followed in March of 1933, the Nazis went from a total of 33% of the vote up to a total of 44%. That's not enough for a majority, but they went about this in a very clever way. They united with the German National People's Party and used the 8% of the vote that that political group had to take them to the 52% majority. Marinus van der Lubbe was actually a half-blind boxer. When he was quite young, he and his friends were playing around outside, and he got a piece of cement flicked up into his eye, and it caused quite a severe infection in the mucous membrane of his eye, which left him partially blind. And probably one of the best bonus facts we'll ever look at, Hitler regularly photographed his speech poses to try to pick which one he would like to use in any given speech. And I think that this one here is definitely the best photo we've ever seen of Hitler. Right, so that finishes off our lesson on the Reichstag fire. Please go ahead and visit Show My Homework and complete your quiz.